Alrighty, well, I know it is basically 1 o'clock at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So thank you so much to everybody who has hopped on our ASCA Live today. This is one of our bigger ones. We're expecting over 250 people. So as per usual, make sure that you are putting your questions in the chat and we will get to them at the end while I am helping Jim. Obviously, here we have Jim Richardson joining us, and we are super excited to have him talk on the color charts. He is probably one of the best experts on this topic, so we're excited to have him talk today. And today's Ask Alive is sponsored by Councilman Hunsacker, so make sure to enjoy, watch, and drop your questions in. Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. For those who don't know me, a little bit about my background. I was not a science major in college. I was an underachiever. Carol Dweck would define me as a fixed mindset. But I left college and started teaching high school in formerly all black schools shortly after integration in the South. Taught there for 9 years, probably got more of an education than I handed out, and learned a lot about kids, and just seeing that kids from different kinds of backgrounds, they're all the same. A lot of it I think was, I learned was who's at home, who's stimulating them, who's helping them. So after teaching for 9 years and coaching club for 8 of those 9 years, I decided to go back to school, study kinesiology, and focus really on exercise physiology and biomechanics. Since then, I've added some neurology of behavior through a course with Bob Sapolsky at Stanford, and then some additional neurological training on motor learning and the like. But my first love was really exercise physiology and biomechanics. Well, let's see. Come on, presenter here. Why is the screen not moving?
Did you try to click in the bottom right-hand corner there?
Or there we go.
Yeah, there you go.
So how did all this start? I came to Michigan in, 1985, I think, and met John Urbanchek, which had a profound effect on my personal life as well as coaching career. He was my partner for 27 years and just one of the best people on the planet. His wife, Melanie, has a PhD in exercise physiology. So he came to practice one day, and I'd been using a format developed by Dr. Bob Trefine at Queensland University, with respect to developing training paces. He called it the V4 methodology, and it was about trying to determine the hypothetical anaerobic threshold training pace, which was, he used 3/400s as a test. And then Melanie Urbanchek brought this article to John from the European Journal of Sports Medicine. And you can recognize the names there: Ulbrich, Madsen, Mader, particularly Jan Ulbrich and Orion Madsen, both of whom I've met and know and have chatted with. Anyway, this article, he gave it to me. I looked at it and I went, John, this is kind of like the Rosetta Stone, or the Holy Grail. So I took Lotus 1, 2, 3 and began to take these percentages of the T30 pace. And what they did was they did tests of repeating 400s or a T30 swim, correlated that with lactate acid levels in the blood. And they came up with these paces, percentages of that pace, and distances and heart rates, so that you could prescribe training levels for people who did a test. And we opted to do it on the T30, which was a 30-minute test, not a 3,000-yard test, because there's some people adopted it to mean 3,000 yards. No, it means a 30-minute steady state test. So the way we did it was we broke it down. we broke the team in half on the day we tested. Half the team would time and record, and the other half of the team would swim. So the swimming team would warm up with about 1,000, and then we would start the set. And we had digital pace clocks, so the swimmer on the deck would be paired with the swimmer in the water, and they would check off the distance and write down the laps. Well, actually, they would write down the total split, and if they could, write down the lap split. The reason I wanted to know the lap split was to know how homogenized the swim was, because when kids are learning to do this, they generally go out too fast and then they fade, and that has an effect on the test and the validity of the test and the number that you're getting. But as you go through time, they learn to be more steady state throughout the swim, and that was important because we're looking also at heart rate. So we'll, as soon as they completed whatever their distance was, and you see there that the distance swimmers swam 3,000 yards, and we had some women who could hold, you know, around a minute per 100. Middle distance people would swim 2,800, and that averaged around 104 per 100. Backstrokers, 110 per 100. They went 26, and we had some backstrokers who could go faster than that. And then breaststrokers would go 2,200. We had some that could go 118, 117 per 100 at that time. We would take a post heart rate of 10 seconds immediately post swim. Then we would wait 30 seconds after that heart rate, take another 10-second heart rate, and then a minute later, take another 10-second heart rate, and then we would add those heart rates up. And by doing that, we learned an awful lot about people's energy systems, the degree of aerobic contribution, how much of the set was done anaerobically, although a large part of it couldn't be, but there's some anaerobic contribution, especially for men, because they have greater capacity for that. So anyway, this is a sheet that we would hand out before each T30. And then after the fact, I would take this data and I would enter it into the computer in Excel. Out of this came pace charts. And this was an original chart that we did. This was white pace work and various distances and various paces on the left. So whatever the sets were in practice, they would look at the distance that they were having to swim, whether it was hundreds or whatever, and then find their pace on their T30 pace on the left, and then they knew, roughly speaking, what they were supposed to hold on that set. The object here being to not allow them to overtrain. To when your goal is to keep them in a particular zone aerobically on certain days, you've got some kids who are just huge overachievers, and they, well, gosh, if I swim, 110, I think I should probably try 107. And that's not what you want, because then they're going to be generating more lactic acid on that set than they should. And they do that regularly and they get into overtraining. And I've had that happen to my athletes. So part of the purpose behind this is to keep people in a range where they're training hypothetically where they should be, and their heart rates are correlating with those speeds. We shifted then with the help of, and I want to give Chris Coraggio credit for helping me develop the formula for developing seconds to minutes and seconds. And then I want to give Joe Plain credit for helping me with this. So we transitioned from doing just a broad chart to individual charts. So you can see in this, we have each person's name there. We enter their T30 pace. And then on the left, I could just click on the buttons for the distances and the colors that I wanted to use in that particular workout. And then it would just print out an 8x11 sheet, and that would go to the lane, so they automatically didn't have to spend all their time looking up their paces. They automatically saw their name, and as the set progressed, they knew exactly how fast they were supposed to be. Highly individualized. On the bottom of that on the left there, it's where you see the enter the T duration percentage here. We did some work with regression equations and came up with hypothetical, well, what if you did a T5? Or what if you did a T15? Or a T10? Or a T20? And we came up with various percentages of the T30 pace, and you would enter that in the blue box, and then it would automatically change all the paces because there is a degradation that happens when you're reducing the time. It becomes a little more anaerobic, so it has an effect on actually the aerobic component of the swim. So, it allows you then when you're starting the season, I don't think you want to do a T30 in October. I think I think you may want to do a 215 or a T10, or even when you're dealing with kids that are just going into puberty, or even pre-pubertal kids, a T5, building them up to be able to do a T5 and just accumulate the data and see what's going on there with pre-pubertal kids for age groupers. But anyway, this is what we developed there, and you click on the hide all, and you start from scratch again, and then you can just print out every day, every other day when you're doing color paste work. And I'll try and make this, available to these charts available to everybody. They can download and utilize them as they see fit. Um, so let's go. So when I decided at one point to see, okay, um, from when I ran the exercise physiology lab at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, we used to do step tests where you'd start at one level, go to the next level, go to the next level, and we would be accumulating gas as well as heart rates. So you can see the effect of increased intensity as you apply greater stress to people during a test. And this is a step test done in the pool where the freestylers would do 9 times 100 on 115. Backstrokers would do 8 100s on 125. Breaststrokers would do 7 100s on 135. Sometimes we do 3 cycles. Sometimes we do 2. Um, but most of the times we do 3 because you're doing 3 cycles of 9 times 100. That's 2,700 yards, and that puts you in that aerobic range. So you're not allowing the anaerobic system to drive the performance. You're relying primarily on the aerobic system. And you can see with the chart here what the variability is, that there's a lot of variability there. And the variability it's interesting that when you get to red pace, the variability is less across the group. But then as you recover, you can see there's more variability again. Why? I don't know. I'm sure somebody can here with a better background in exercise science than I have can explain that. But certainly part of it is the degree of aerobic contribution to anaerobic contribution. Might have been smarter to do 200s. I don't know. But I felt hundreds because I kind of wanted to include sprinters at that time. And I felt like anything over 100 for sprinters was going to be problematic from a psychological standpoint. So, anyway, this kind of proves the validity of the research as we applied it to what we were doing. Um, and this is the data that generated. Now, or the data that generated the chart, and what I looked for were aberrations. If you look here at RG, this was a breaststroker I had who made the world championship team. And the summer before this academic year, she went to the Mare Nostrum and got sick. She got really sick and came back, and she just did not look like herself. Um, and I think this was maybe the third test we did, and her heart rates were, and we sent her to the doctor, and they looked at everything, cortisol levels, heart rates. I don't think they gave her a stress test, but this is a stress test. and we never could figure out what it was. I just started resting her. I mean, I gave her 4 mornings off a week and just I couldn't think of anything else to do. She swam okay at the end of the season, but this is an example of how that kind of testing gives you information about where an athlete is. If you look under freestyle here, this was one of our distance swimmers, and you can see she has the lowest resting heart rate, the lowest clear pace, lowest white pace, the lowest red pace, and the best recovery of anybody. Well, she finaled at NC2As in the 400 IM and doubled on the last day in the mile and 200 fly, which were back to back and finaled in both of them, um, which tells you no surprise there. She's got a terrific aerobic system. And then you could see the freestylers down there that their heart rates were problematic. And some of that was talent. Some of it certainly was talent. And I think these were two freshmen who had never been exposed to this type of sustained aerobic stimulus training. And so it was probably an aberration. So what do the averages mean and what do the max and mins mean? I don't know. I look at it more as evaluating people individually. And then I also looked at them evaluating them by strokes. And I thought it was really interesting that the backstrokers across the board until you got to red pace, which is anaerobic threshold. And let's define real quickly. White pace is aerobic threshold, and it's supposed to elicit a 2 millimole per liter blood lactate concentration. Red and blue are anaerobic threshold, 4 millimoles per liter. And then clear, I just wanted a pace that was kind of a recovery pace. Or on recovery days, we would just kind of swim clear stuff so that we kept their heart rates. And you could see, let's go back one. The heart rates there in clear are the average is about 131, which is right. I mean, that's what we found in terms of our research, and then around 150 for white and 175 for red. And that's, we've seen that over and over again on average. But then you have your outliers who are your extreme aerobic athletes, and then your other outliers are your pure sprinters. And so we had to make a change for our pure sprinters. I thought it was interesting that the backstrokers, generally speaking, were lower, except when they got to red. But when you look at their recoveries, they recover lower than anybody else. And the only thing I could think of was because it's easier for them to breathe. They don't have to hold their breath as much between strokes. Um, so, and the breaststrokers are obviously holding their breath longer between strokes. So, hypothetically, their heart rate should be higher because they just don't have easy free exchange. So it's you should kind of pay attention to what stroke they're swimming. That also allows me to say that T30s should be done in stroke. You should not swim butterfly, but T30s should be done in their primary stroke. And we even took our IMers and we tried to break the 30-minute swim up into 10-minute segments for backstroke, breaststroke, and freestyle. So we could get a backstroke pace, a breaststroke pace, and a freestyle pace for our IMers. Because I really like what Jan Olbrecht says about IM training, is that your whole first semester, you should be trying to develop capacity into the individual strokes. You should not be swimming a lot of IM. You want to build endurance in the first part of the season into those strokes individually. Then when you start to integrate anaerobic training in, okay, now you can do anaerobic training as well as combined IM swimming in one form or another. And I think Jan's pretty much dead on that, because if you're swimming IMs, if you think you're swimming repeat IMs and you're going to develop aerobic capacity in the individual strokes, I have news for you. That's not going to happen because you don't have sustained work within each individual stroke to develop aerobic capabilities in those strokes. I'll explain a little bit later how to develop aerobic capacity into or endurance into butterfly. Then John was looking for shortcuts on how to how to do a T30 pace without doing a T30. So we took a look at a lot of stuff and we looked at, you can see below, this is a workbook where you can do a 500 test, a single 400 test, an average of repeat 400s, a 300 test, an average of repeat 300s, a 200 test, an average of, we did everything. And so these are the things that John wanted to do to find multiple ways of getting at the same thing without having to repeat a T30 all the time. I'm so linear that I thought there was great value in swimming a T30. I just think that that length of swim, with the exception of for sprinters, um, just did something metabolically that you really couldn't quite do breaking it up into segments. So I continued to do T30 for a long time, but I, sometimes I would throw a quickie in there instead of a T30 and then come back to a T30 and just kind of see what happens. Um, so then we did some reverse engineering. And what we did was we looked at the best times of people and we backed it up into what their T30 pace was, which really it's the threshold pace per 100. That's the T30. And so what John hypothesized was, okay, well, if you want to swim a 500 free for a guy, college guy, in 405, you need to have a T30 pace of 55 flat, which means on repeat 200s and repeat 300s, this is what you've got to hold. This is what you've got to hold for blue. This is what you've got to hold for purple. And then that predicts for this 1650 time, this 500 time, this 200 time. Now, again, this is the mean of a normal curve, okay? And there are outliers who on both sides of that T30 pace. Some are actually going to be a little faster, some are going to be a little bit slower, but it gives you, and for John, he wanted the swimmers to have an idea of, if I want to go this fast at the end of the season, these are the some of the things I have to do in my training to get there. Again, this is college aged men, some of whom are not completely post-pubertal. You've got late bloomers there for sure. And then we did the same thing for women. And I spoke to Bruce Gemmell, who trained Katie. And you can see Katie's time there at 57 flat was her T30. And of course, 1504 and I don't know, what was it, 424, I think. And I think 140 point. But I look at her and then I look at Emily Brenneman, who I had. And Emily Brenneman's T30 pace was like 59 high. Um, and she went 438 in the 500, but she went 1551 in the mile. So, I use that a lot to compare, with swimmers that I would talk to their coaches, and you're using this, this person is national caliber. What's her T30 pace? What does she go? I can see what she goes for a 500 and a mile and a 200. And obviously, when you work down to the 200 is going to have a greater anaerobic component. So there can be a lot of disparity between what you see for their pace per 100 for, say, a mile, and then what they end up being able to go for a 200. For example, Katie Ledecky could go 140 point back in the day for yards for 200-yard freestyle. Emily Brenneman couldn't break 148, but they were much closer in their mile paces percentage wise. So it just showed me that Emily was she just didn't have the anaerobic capabilities that Katie did. Although we tried to push that envelope because she had been trained 10,000 yards of workout down at Anderson Barracudas before she came to us. So she had a very good aerobic base, and we wondered about trying to increase her anaerobic capabilities, and we were able to do it somewhat, but certainly not to the level of some other people. She just didn't have that. And of course, she went on to be FINA world champion for the season in the 10K. Um, then this came from Jan Olbrecht's um, presentations and his book, The Science of Winning. Just a basic explanation of anaerobic and aerobic capacity and power. There was some controversy at the time about his original publications, as how if you're reading Science of Winning, the first edition, he juxtaposed power with capacity in terms of my understanding. Um, Capacity to me has always meant the total amount that you're able to accumulate. And power has meant to me the classic definition of work over time. So, how much work you can do in X amount of time. And as you decrease time and increase work, you're more powerful. And that's different from capacity. And I think in his later publications, he changed it. I saw a couple. Well, I've got it online in here that he's now adopting the definitions that we kind of use in the States about capacity and power. But I think this is worthwhile looking at. The book is, you got to read some paragraphs more than once. It's okay. And you can always call Matt Kredich because Matt's had him there several times, and he's Jan has done more lactate testing probably than anybody and correlated it with swimming ability. And the reason we went to T30 correlated with heart rate was we just didn't have the ability to do lactate testing. So we needed another variable to correlate swimming pace with, and that was heart rate. Um, I like the new, what's it, the Polar H10 Plus or something like that. That's a temporal heart rate monitor. Boy, if you haven't started using it, holy cow, you need to, because in real time with Bluetooth, it broadcasts to an iPad or phone, and in real time you can see heart rates of people while they're actually swimming. I'm trying to get TYR or somebody to superimpose that heart rate inside of the goggle so the athlete can actually see it in real time, not only, you know, pace and laps, but what your heart rate is while you're actually doing it in real time. That's critical to me, I think. This is Gennadius Sokolowis's energy system levels, and you can see there's red, blue, purple, anaerobic, alactate, and lactate. Recommendations for work rest. Again, this is all post-pubertal, mature swimmers. This is Sergey Belyev's 3S system. Same kind of concept, except more intricate levels of, you know, time limits within each of those systems, the kind of intensities that you need to see, the heart rate, generally the heart rate limitations that you're going to see. Those kind of things I think are all interesting to look at, learn from. This is another example of the 3S system. Um, then you get into season planning, and that's the application of those color charts. How much you do, when you do it, when you decrease, when you increase. Um, the adaptation to stress is curvilinear. It doesn't really happen in a linear form according to a lot of exercise scientists. That's why some of these programs, Gennadius has had one. I don't know if he still uses it or not. 3S has one where they've incorporated a lot of the curvilinear aspects of adaptation to performance as they develop a season plan. And I've used both Gennadius's and Sergey's system, and I like both of them. Um, and out of that, I went to Excel again, and I did a season. This is a typical season plan for us, where week by week, the total yards, how much in the afternoon workout, how much in the morning workout, how much clear work, how much white and pink, red and blue, anaerobic power, anaerobic capacity work, alactate speed work. If I had to change anything on this now, the first 3 weeks, I would have done alactate speed work. I'm a big proponent of Australian reverse periodization. It's not really totally reverse periodization. It's just the avoidance of lactate producing work as you start the season, uh, and focusing on developing aerobic capacity. And you can always throw in sprint, non-lactate producing sprint work, 15 seconds of sprint with at least a minute to a minute and a half recovery to resynthesize ATP with PC or PC with ATP and ATP with PC so that you're recovering completely and there's no strain on the heart. It's fun. Kids like to do it. They like to go fast. So I would probably change that. And then I didn't put down the taper for NC2As, but it's basically backing up 3 weeks and then retapering. This is a linear plan. Time out for me just a second. I need to close the doors here to this room. Okay, I'm back. So this is a linear plan, and I'm not opposed to a linear plan because I think that within a linear plan, people are curvilinear in their adaptation. In other words, there's some days when they're really adapting, there's some days when they're not. That's okay. I think it still allows for curvilinear adaptation. Um, and you can see below, the dates of the workouts and or the weeks of the workouts. And this is just a graphic representation of the previous slide that I showed you. This is a kind of a typical weekly plan. Um, John liked to train Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday mornings, and Monday through Friday afternoons. And I stopped doing Tuesday and Thursday mornings because I wanted to experiment one year because I thought, people were getting too tired at times. So we just dropped Tuesday and Thursday mornings and we only did 9 workouts a week instead of 11. And we swam better. We swam better. And this is just kind of an average, middle of the season, maybe, workout for us, middle distance, yards, not meters. Um, we did a lot of, morning pulling and kicking primarily in the mornings. And yeah, afternoon on Wednesday, we made a low intensity recovery workouts, focused a lot on technique. Um, and actually, our cool downs were always technique oriented, particular drills or the like. This would be an aerobic power workout. Well, I think it's both, honestly, I think it's both capacity and power. If you'll notice the little red speed bumps in there, I got that from Jan Olbrecht, that he said it's really good to sprinkle in some shorter red stuff in between longer aerobic swims because it just stimulates the system to gear up a little more. So we started doing that, and I think the kids kind of liked it because it put more variety into a rather mundane set of repeats with colors. You'll notice the fly column, and this is an example of how we built aerobic capacity or endurance into butterfly for the 200 butterflyers. And I got this from Bailey Weathers, that we would swim a 200 free to kind of get through the oxygen deprivation at the beginning of a set, and then kick it up a little bit, and then go our flies. So we would go like 850s a fly or 1625s a fly, and then we would repeat that set over and over and over again 4 times. So they're swimming a lot of butterfly on relatively short rest, just cruising and holding their stroke. We did initially swim butterfly on our T30s because we believe work is specific. And man, our butterflyers got a whole lot better at the T30. Unfortunately, their 100 and 200 fly was slower at the end of the season than their lifetime bests. And I think because fly, swimming at T30 really changes things in your fly. It doesn't seem to do it that much in breaststroke, but it does in butterfly. So this is how we started building, aerobic capabilities into butterfly for people who are really good butterflyers. And, they need to get ready for a 200 butterfly aerobically. And there are lots of variations you can do on this. Um, you can see again the distances are 3,000. The pure distance people there, you can see if you look at the distance workout, this is kind of a main set workout that John did. Um, and I remember Haley Pearsall did this one, and her 3 400s, I think she did on roughly 30 seconds rest, descend 1 to 3. And I still remember today what she did. She went 4:26 on the first one from a push. Then she went 4:21, and then she went 4:12. And this is after about 9,000 meters of work, long course. That's the best set I've ever seen. I mean, I ain't never seen nothing like that. And we had Michael Phelps for 4 years, and yeah, she was amazing. So anyway, those are kind of classic way of the way we applied what we were doing. Um, some of you are age group coaches, so that brings to the forefront age appropriate application of test sets and aerobic training. Number one, I think you have to pay attention to biological versus chronological age. You've got some 12-year-old girls and some 12-year-old boys who they ain't your average 12-year-old. I had one back in 1978. He went 16:30 something for the mile, 5:01 for the 500 free, 1:52 for the 200 free, 4:30 flat for the 400 meters, 2:12. He was the fastest 12-year-old in the country at 12. He didn't swim after his freshman year in college. I left the program when he was 14 and he was starting to settle in with the other kids who were starting to grow and catch up. And I thought he was great at 12 at 1:52. And then Stephanie, who was it? Stephanie Linehan? Kim Linehan. Somebody in Florida went 1:48 at 12, a female. And I thought, oh my goodness, I thought I knew what fast was. But and that's the other thing. You're generally speaking, females are going to mature earlier than males. And the tendency is to move them into training with the older females or the older group. And I think to a certain degree that's fine. I wouldn't do it 100%. Um, but I think you also have to pay attention to the social aspects of training with their peer group age wise. I did have a swimmer who I lost to parents being transferred, and she went to an unnamed state, and one of the older and she they went to an away meet, and she was had aged up to 13, and one of the older swimmers, girl swimmers on the team, felt it was her duty to teach these girls how to drink. And so at 13, she started partying, having been taught by an older swimmer, and she was out of swimming by 14. And I thought she had a lot of ability. She could have swum in college. So I've experienced firsthand what can happen socially to somebody when they're taken out of their normal psychological development group and placed in with another group at a different maturation level psychologically, I don't think it's really good for those younger kids. I think you can throw them in there a workout every now and then to challenge them because they're capable biologically from a standpoint of where they're in puberty, but to do it all the time, nah, not a fan. Um, so prepubertal kids, I think you want to constantly develop their aerobic capacity. In other words, being able to swim longer distances with a good stroke at a steady state and just keep trying to push that envelope, but not giving them paces. Just, all right, we're going to swim, 300. And, if you're doing stroke counts, I want you to try to do this by 25. And, I don't care how long it takes you to get there. I think doing alactate sprints with them, they love. It's fun doing relays, swimming fast, 25s. Those kids love to go fast. Generally speaking, they love to race. Avoiding lactate production completely because they don't have an anaerobic system yet, really, that's developed. Spending a lot of time on technique. That's all I do now. I just do technique clinics. Big fan of Bill Boomer. We just do the boomer balance to create a platform, and then we build a kick onto the platform with undulation or rotation. Finally, add the arms and do a lot of distance per stroke, and then a lot of filming and comparing what they're doing to world-class people. Everything's done and played in slow motion so they can really see what's going on, and then have fun. And those kids, they need to have fun. They're not playing a game unless you've figured out good games, that you can do in the water with them that are going to enhance the things you're trying to work on. Um, when they go into puberty, I think you can start your gradual application of the color charts, everything from clear to blue, but understanding you want to do less red and blue early on because they just don't have the anaerobic capabilities to do much there. And be sure that at red and blue, you're producing some lactate, 4 millimoles, on average, but there's some kids who are going to produce 6, 8 millimoles. And again, it's an average. Um, you want to do the gradual introduction of anaerobic training. You don't want to crush them, but as they get more and more capable, you just gradually increase the volume of what they're doing. The intensities to me should be based on percentages of best time, so that they've got some goal paces to hit anaerobically, which I've done that also. Spend a lot of time on technique still. Why? Because they're growing. So their lever lengths are changing. Their torso length is changing. The relationship between their center of buoyancy and their center of mass is changing. So you have to constantly be working on the balance work so that they're able to accommodate the new skeletal structure, understanding that muscular growth, skeletal growth precedes muscular growth by anywhere from 3 to 6 months. So the ability of a kid to control their skeletal system muscularly, who's really growing, that it's not so good sometimes. They look like they're really uncoordinated, but it's just being patient and waiting for that muscular growth to catch up with the skeletal growth. So spend a lot of time on technique also there, then having fun. And then post-pubertal, you're talking about full application, still working on technique and still allowing them to have fun. It's just, I think it's so important in an individual sport. We try to make it team as much as we can, but it ain't football, it ain't basketball. Basketball, it's, you're not scoring goals, you're winning and losing really to me is just, did I do that race the way I wanted to? Okay, how fast was it? What were things internally that I was thinking about? How did those things affect the race? Having those kind of conversations post race, where if you're teaching your kids this system, they understand it, they know it, and they're engaged with the process, which means they have more ownership over their swimming. And then your ability to communicate with them is not authoritarian. It's transformational. It's somewhat transactional. It's informative. Um, and those are interesting conversations to have to me. Asking them, well, why do you think this? Or why do you think that? Um, so that they start to own their swimming. I've never been a fan of do it because I said so. Um, I think kids respond far better when they understand why they're doing things the way they're doing them, and then they gain ownership over what they're doing. I had a swimmer come to me after her junior year. She was a breaststroker and she conso fin I think she maybe conso finaled at NC2As and her teammate won the 200 breaststroke and finaled in the 100 and I trained them both the same way. She came to me after her junior year and said, "Jim, I think I need to do more sprint training. I don't think," and her and I should have seen that because her T30 pace was 4 seconds per hundred slower than the other swimmer who won NC2 A's. So I said, "Okay, what do you think is good?" And she said, I think I need to go sprint 3 days a week." So we sprinted her 3 days a week, and she finished third in NC2As in the 100 breaststroke and broke her best time by 2 seconds. And fifth. She finished fifth overall, won the Conso finals in a time that would have been fifth fastest in the nation. That was 6 seconds faster than her 100 breaststroke. And and she came to me and said, "See, I told you." And I said, "Nah, you wouldn't have been that good if you hadn't done 3 years of aerobic breaststroke training." But I was just kidding because she was right. And if I'd paid attention to heart rates and paces, I would have seen she's just not as aerobically capability as Anne was. So I needed to readjust her training. So I think that's it. That gives us what a little less than 15 minutes for Q&A. Ariel, what do you want to do there?
So what I will do is I'll go ahead and start reading off the questions as they've been put in the chat, and then you can answer and we'll go from there. Sound good?
Okay, winner.
All right, so Don says at the beginning of the T30, what were the instructions to swimmers on the pace slash effort they should swim at?
Well, we did some repeat hundreds, just teaching them how to cruise initially, not on the day of the test, but leading up to the test, so that they understood steady state, so that when we hit the test, they already had experience of doing steady state repeat 100s. And we would maybe go, 8 100s at, like the perceived exertion scale, where you're just kind of, okay, this is low effort, then maybe 5 100s at medium effort, and then 5 100s, see what you can hold. So they got a feeling of being able to pace and hold a certain pace for a length of time. So that's what we did. I'm sure there are other ways, but that's what we did.
All right, next one. Does this work for masters? Because many slash most cannot keep those paces and those heart rates will be problematic for some of the older 50 plus swimmers.
I think that doing T5s and things like that, if you use the T5 chart, or even the T10 chart, you'll get a number, and they can most likely swim at those paces. I'm just hypothesizing. I've never done it with master swimmers, but I think the question is, are you going to get a really accurate number having these master swimmers go for 30 minutes? Probably not, because you've got such a diverse group of people swimming masters. Some can, some who swam collegiately can, but those who can't, do the T5. Build them up to a T5, and then use the paces that you get on the individual chart from the T5.
Alrighty. Next one here. If you were doing a T30 in a stroke and you break it up into 3 times 10 minutes, how much rest in between 10 minutes?
Well, enough time to take a heart rate. So I would say 30 seconds. All you want is a 6 second a 10-second heart rate. So you take a 10-second heart rate. Although now if you can afford the Polar, what is it, plus H1O or H10. I don't know if you all have seen that. It's awesome. And it's a temporal heart rate monitor you put on your goggle strap, and it's sending out in real time to your iPad or whatever, or your MacBook or whatever, the heart rates in real time. So you know exactly where they are. I would still give them 30 seconds in between just to let them take a 10-second and correlate with what you've been recording or what you've been seeing on your iPad or computer or whatever. That's if I were doing it now, that's what I would be doing.
Alrighty. I see another request for the Excels. We will be sending out the recording and the any of the handouts that Jim has, hopefully later this afternoon. So you will be getting that. The next one here is, can this also apply with short course meters and long course meters? We don't have yards in our country.
Right. We've done it both and we haven't seen a significant difference even with the turns that you have short course versus long course. We really haven't seen a significant difference. I wish I had done a step test long course retrospectively just to compare and see the difference. I would challenge some of you to do that and compare it to what you're getting short course. But I'm pretty sure, I can't remember. I think the original set was, I think the stuff was done long course. I'd need to go back and reread it. I haven't read it in a long time, but I think it was done long course because it was done in Germany, and it was either done short course meters or long course, but it certainly wasn't done yards. It's interesting that what they found when we transferred it to yards using the same percentages, we got almost identical results. We never correlated it with lactate, only heart rate, only heart rate.
All right, next one. When performing a t-test to get the most accurate results, how fresh should the athletes be? Can you just use best time for meets?
We always try to do it on a Monday because hypothetically they're fresher on a Monday, and that morning workout was not a killer. I wanted the test to be done under the same circumstances frequently because you're going to get better validity when you have that kind of reliability. And the reliability is based on what you're doing and when you're doing it and how you're doing it. So if you're repeating that all the time, you're probably going to get better validity results.
All right, reading through the comments here, I see a lot of love for some heart rate monitors, some love for Jack Simon here.
Yeah.
Another question. I noticed sometimes there was no pink in your charts. Is that because it's sometimes hard to hold kids at that level?
No, I mean, we're pretty much, equal opportunity with the colors. We use pink a fair amount. There's some days when we only did white and pink. Um, if you look at the individual pace charts, there's pink there for all the distances. Clear, clear one, clear two, white, pink, red, and blue. I will say this about purple. I think the purple paces can be misleading, and here's why. Theoretically, according to Wilkie and Modson, VO2 max is about 80% anaerobic and 20% aerobic. It has a it has a big anaerobic component. That's why you can only do about 1,500 meters total of VO2 max work. When you use a test that's primarily aerobic to prescribe VO2 max training paces, I always found that from my real true distance kids, they struggled with blue and purple. They really struggled with blue and purple. Why? They didn't have a lot of anaerobic capability. So it didn't, I left the purple in, but what I ended up doing was I ended up taking best times for 200 and then doing percentage of that. And I want to say I've got charts. I have anaerobic pace charts, and I think the VO2 max is 90% of your 200 time is your 88, 90% of your 200 time pace is VO2 max on average. So I used an anaerobic primarily anaerobic event, which had an aerobic component to determine VO2 max or purple paces.
All right, next one here. I see a comment that says involve the athletes in the discussion of why and make them think, which is a great tip. For a T5 test, do you still recommend the steady pace?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, perceived exertion scale, you may want to look at that. Is with the young ones, how fast should I go? Well, I want you to feel like this, and heart rates with those kids, oh my goodness, they're going to be all over the place. So I don't know if you can really correlate, heart rates with those kids, but I think their perceived exertion, well, how hard was that, And I think that's one area where we're really weak in swimming is developing kinesthetic awareness. I see it in technique work all the time. I think dancers are the best. They go into a dance studio and there are mirrors all over the wall, so the brain is always correlating what they're seeing with how it feels. And we don't, how fast does that feel? How hard is that? Trying to get them to be more kinesthetically aware, both in terms of when they're swimming as well as technically. It's a problem we've got in swimming, and the more we can do to figure it out, the better athlete they're going to be.
All right, next one. You mentioned intensity based on percentage best time. Do you have a particular percentage of best time you're trying to hit for each color?
No, not of best time, not of best time. Because the what we're trying to hit for each color is based on how they tested on the T30 or some form of aerobic testing. I only use best times on anaerobic events. 50, 100, 200. That's all I use percentages on, percentage of best time. I do compare percentages of best times versus percentages of T30 times with swimmers. So it allows me to see more individual differences among them rather than classifying everybody. Oh, they're a distance swimmer, so they're going to no, and they can't do this. John had Brent Lang, who made the Olympic team on the 400 freestyle relay. Brent Lang, what did he go? 20.1 in the 50 freestyle and could hold 58.6 per 100 on a T30. I'm like, what? I had Amy McCullough who could swim under 10 minutes for the 1,000 in season and split 22 flat on a freestyle relay. What's that? They're outliers. Those people are outliers. And testing and then looking at percentages of best time allows you to identify outliers. Those are people who are like greater than two standard deviations outside the mean. But I think the testing allows you to really better understand the individuality of each person's energy system. And I sure missed the boat on that breaststroker I told you about. If I'd been paying more attention to it, I probably would have changed her after her sophomore year, and she would have had 2 years to really, really shine the way she was capable.
All right, we got a couple more questions here before we're out of time. Can you explain the math of using a T10 to find threshold pace per 100?
Yeah, when you download the chart, you'll see the regression equation we used. We developed a regression equation based on the research that Modern, Orion Madsen and Mater did. So we just did a regression because speed is curvilinear. It's not linear. So it really conforms pretty well to a regression, which is curvilinear in nature. And so we just took a look at some regressions and centered on one that we felt like hit the majority of the swimmers.
All right, last two here. When training at altitude and doing pink, red 10, red 30, or VO2 max, do you recommend giving the athletes more rest or keeping rest the same?
I think you got to have them slow down because there's less oxygen at altitude, so that automatically prompts the swim to be more anaerobic. So starting with white and pink work and some clear white and pink work and see how many days it takes each swimmer to adapt. everybody's different. Everybody's really different how they adapt to altitude. And I think you're probably talking what Scottsdale, Springs, etc. And but using probably some sort of a test, maybe giving them a T5, and if you've got T30s, um, look at the difference between the T5 and the T30, and I don't know there because you've got a lot of data there. You can utilize that to see how people are adapting, and will they totally be able to adapt to sea level or your, whatever your altitude is. It's not high altitude. Again, I think it's a very individual thing. It's individually based.
All right, I have the last one here, Jim, if you have time, if you don't mind. This says, do you have any prescribed amounts of rest for colors?
Well, the prescription in the built into the research was white and pink are 10 to 15 seconds rest between repeats. Any repeats that you're doing. Red and blue is 30. We put 30 to 40. Clear, I think we did 10 to 15. Clear one was 10 to 15. Clear two was 30 to 40. So those were the prescribed rests between repeats that the research came up with. We didn't invent that. That came from, their research.
Alrighty. I know we have one last question here from Karen. Sorry, Jim. What about a swimmer who trains year round at altitude? There we go.
Yeah, I think that's great. Um, I think their hemoglobin's going to be a winner. I mean, one of the best years we ever had. John took our swimmers up to altitude to taper, so they did their taper at altitude, and they came down, and man, did we swim. I mean, I couldn't believe some of the swims. I had a breaststroker who she went 110 in the 100 back then, and that made the world championship team. And then she swam the 200, and we were talking about pacing and everything. And she goes out in 115, and I'm going, "What are you doing? What are you?" She came home in 115. She even split a 200-meter breaststroke. And if you're coming home in 115 back then, you're going 225, 220, 225 long course, which at that time would have put her top five in the world, top four in the world, I think. So, tapering at altitude, John was really sure not to do a lot of lactate accumulation work and more aerobic, just aerobic maintenance capacity, keep the aerobic system really high. And then the sprint work, a lot of it, there was some lactate production, not very much lactate tolerance, and a lot of alactate speed. Because when you're doing a lot of lactate tolerance, it has an inverse relationship with your aerobic capacity. You can read Jan Olbrecht's work on that. The more anaerobic capacity work you do, the more your anaerobic threshold drops. So you have to balance those out and be careful with that. And
All
he's better at explaining that than I am.
Awesome. All right. Well, I know that we are past time here, and I want to be respectful of everybody who hopped on. So thank you to everybody that joined us today in honor of Thank You Coach Month. Jim, we are super excited to have you today. This was a great presentation. I know everybody's giving you some love in the comments and some fun little reactions here in the chats. For those of you who signed up via the website and are ASCA members, you should be getting your ACE credits here, hopefully within the next hour. If you don't, you know where to find me and ask questions. You can send an email to education@swimmingcoach.org. And then don't forget, we have one more ASCA Live in the month of November. That's going to be with Patrick Henry on From Applicants to Assets, finding the right people for your team. And that's going to be focused on HR for our level 5s. So again, Jim, thanks so much for hopping on today. We'll get that recording and those assets out to you all later today, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you. Enjoyed it. Do well, everybody. Keep it moving.
Bye bye.